Hello, everybody, and welcome to proPUCKERS, part of the Tundra Enthusiast News Network. I'm Mike Fink, and we're back with some season previews. And I'm joined this week by Alex Jovanci, who covers NJD, who covers the New Jersey Devils for NJD on the Rush, and he also covers the NHL at large for the Hockey Writers. So, Alex, how are you doing?
Good. How you doing?
I'm doing good, and I've got Colin Newby, who covers the Philadelphia Flyers for 97.5 The Fanatic. I think I pronounced that correctly. Hey, Colin, how are you doing?
Great. Excited to do the show.
Yeah, I'm excited. So Colin covers the Flyers, Alex covers the Devils. So we've got a lot of the division, the Metropolitan Division covered, which is what we're going to cover today. And the way we're going to cover it is there's kind of three tiers. I would put the division into three tiers. There's the Stanley Cup contender tier, the top tier. You have teams that you can make the argument they could finish with the best record in their division or the Eastern Conference for that matter. And you've got the middle tier, which I would say are the borderline playoff teams where if things go right, they could be in the middle tier. And then there's the third tier, which I'll just put one team, and it's the Blue Jackets. And I guess we'll start with them, where a lot went wrong, obviously, and a lot is going wrong for them. And they're projected to be one of the worst teams in the NHL and probably the worst in the division unless things go right. I mean, a lot has to go right, but I guess with the Blue Jackets, there's an obvious lot to dive into with them. They had a disastrous offseason with Johnny Gaudreau being with his tragic passing and the offseason as a whole being a mess, and it's going to take a while for them to recover. So for them, just both off the ice and on the ice, it just seems like this is going to be a season to throw away. I guess, Colin, is there anything really to add to that? I'll start with you. Anything to add to that, really?
No, I think there's a lot going on even off the ice with just dysfunction within the organization. And obviously it's tragic what happened with Johnny Gaudreau. That's not in their control. But there's just a lack of stability all around. You look at the preseason story last year, you can't even get your coach into the regular season with Kekalainen now. They've got a long ways to go, and they have other steps to take before they even get to the roster on the ice.
Yeah, just the whole last season, they cleared house, so they have a new GM, a new head coach. It seems like in the long run, they'll probably be better off because they have Don Waddell is a good GM and Dean Evason's a good head coach, but it just seems like they're still a while away from. There's still it's still a few years. Alex, I guess you'd agree. It's still like this year's a throwaway year almost, where it's just like, okay, they're gonna have to deal with it, and then after that,
I agree. Start from the bottom.
Yeah,
Alex. They're basically building through the draft at this point, and they have a lot of good prospects. I expect a better year from Adam Fantilli. Not that he was bad last season. I just expect them to take a step forward. Same for David Jiricek. Those guys will be their key parts of their rebuild, so they kind of need to take a bit of a step forward this season. But obviously, there's the tragic passing of Gaudreau, which, like Colin said, there's nothing they can do about that. But that obviously hurts their roster that he's not on the team anymore. So we'll have to see what they do. I think it's going to be a tough year regardless for them. They were always probably pegged for that 8th place spot in the division. They're just not up to par with the rest of the teams, in spots 1 through 7.
Yeah. And and that kind of leads to the next tier, which you could put 4 or 5, pretty much of the 8 teams in the division, you could put 4 or 5 teams in that second tier, which is, if things go right, they can make the playoffs. If not, you could see them all in the 7th place team. Let's start with the Pittsburgh Penguins here. And one of the big takeaway I have from them is the core is good. There's not much else to look forward to with them. And I'm wondering what the outlook is. Alex, I'll start with you on this. The question is, what does the path to the playoffs look like? And if it doesn't happen, what changes for them? Because Crosby's going to be there still, and I guess the core is still going to be there, but what changes for them if they don't make the playoffs? First of all, what's the path to the playoffs? And second, what changes if that doesn't happen? Because it seems like an unlikely path for them, even if a lot goes right.
Yeah, so they need Crosby to go nuclear again, just like he did last season. He was 45 goals, I think, and close to 100 points, if I'm not mistaken, or at least in the 90-point range. You never know with these guys at their ages. Malkin, Crosby, Letang are all in their late 30s, but they did add a little bit of young talent with Rutger McGroarty trade this offseason, which I really like for them. They needed to add some young players, young skill in particular to that lineup, and I think he's probably going to be able to contribute right away. I don't know how good he'll be, but it wouldn't shock me if he's like a 20-goal, 35, 40-point scorer as a rookie. They also need Tristan Jarry to stay healthy, be someone that they can depend on in net. They say availability is the best ability, and he's not always around health-wise, so they need him to stay healthy. They're kind of, and I wrote this in my Metro preview for the Hockey Writers, they're just kind of like in that, we have this broken down into tiers, and they're kind of in that tier of teams that I think could be bubble teams with the Capitals and the Islanders and the Flyers as well. Like, I think any one of those 4 teams could probably be competing for a wild card spot. So I don't know what the path is exactly for them. It obviously starts with Crosby, but I think their depth needs to be a little bit better, and they definitely need to tighten up defensively because last year they just couldn't defend the rush whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, you could see there are some of the pieces there, but it just everything needs to go right. And Colin, like, is it really? I mean, is depth the big thing for them? Because there isn't. What you're getting out of Crosby and Malkin, Letang, Erik Karlsson. Those are the 4 skaters. But after that, it's really what you're getting. Is it the depth for them, or is it? I mean, maybe it's the goaltending, let's say, or just or really Crosby playing out of his mind, which he did last year. They didn't make the playoffs anyway, so maybe that's not enough for them. What do you think? What do you think it is for them?
I think the depth has a lot to do with it. There were just so many trades throughout tenures of multiple GMs, and especially with Ron Hextall at the end there, they didn't have the clearest direction, and now they're kind of in an awkward spot. I think getting Rutger McGroarty, maybe it's good long term, but are you really going to say an NHL breakout is going to be the big thing that pushes them this year? That might be a little bit ambitious. And just losing Gensel at the deadline last year, it's going to be hard for them. I don't think they're on the best track, but I also don't factor in Crosby's age as much as maybe I would another guy at that point in his career, because he's just so crafty and skilled in a way that I don't think age impacts him as much as it might for, say, a Burner who's going to lose his speed in his late 30s. I think he's still going to have most of his skill, and maybe he does replicate the year he had last year.
Yeah, it is interesting you mentioned the Gensel trade. They traded at the trade deadline one of their star players who was a pending free agent, and he was a rental, and they traded him. And I think the irony is that they almost had to trade him. You look at their roster now, and that was a trade they needed to make. I mean, Alex, like that's by making that trade, it does give them a little bit of hope because they got Michael Bunting and a few other prospects in the mix that you could say like that might help them this season, because they had to make the trade. They traded away a star player who is no longer on the roster, and they're going to miss that scoring presence. But now that they actually have some depth that they could work with, it seems like, right?
Yeah, I actually like that Michael Bunting trade for them, or at least picking him up in the Gensel trade. And he was pretty good for them last season. I think he had like 19 points in 23 games or something like that. So he sort of found his game again after kind of struggling in Carolina for a little bit. Yeah, obviously that Gensel trade, they had to make it, but if you can get Bunting to be, I don't know, like a 20-goal, 50 to 55-point scorer, that's definitely going to help a lot. They need Ricard Raquel to rebound from a pretty tough season last season, and then, like I said before, McGroarty has to contribute at some level too. I think their bottom 6 is a little bit better than it was last season with getting Kevin Hayes and Blake Lizotte, but it's still a little bit of a question mark for me. Lars Eller is still pretty good for what he is too. A good defensive player. Like, I don't think the Penguins, I wouldn't, pencil them into the playoffs, but I think they're going to be in the race. It wouldn't shock me if they're hanging around like that 90 to 92 point range. I think last year they only missed by like 4 points or something like that. They were an 88-point team, so it wouldn't shock me if they are close again, because I think they're a little bit better than what they were last season.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting that they could be a little bit better, but also there's the argument that this team's still getting older and still trying to push that window, but by doing that, they're getting slightly worse. And Colin, I kind of wonder, where do you see the Penguins heading into the season based on the outlook? Like, yes, they added depth and they are moving pieces around outside of the core, but but at the same time, it's the same group and it's a little bit older, same group at the top and it's a little bit older. Where do you make them heading into the season?
I don't see them as a playoff team because there's been a pretty slow slide, but it has gone downward over time. They win the Stanley Cups in 16, 17, I guess, and then they become a playoff team who can win in the early rounds, and then they become a playoff team who loses in the first round. And now they're no longer a playoff team, and we're discussing, did they really do enough to get back? I don't know if they did. So you always want to keep them in the mix with Sidney Crosby. I mean, he's proved plenty of people wrong before, but at this point, I would not pick them to be a playoff team.
Yeah, and I guess shifting to the team that did back their way into the playoffs, the Washington Capitals, they're the testament to why a lot of people say the Metropolitan Division's stacked, it's loaded, and I'm like, it's not as good as people think it is, because Washington Capitals are a good case in point. They backed their way into the playoffs last year, and they proved that they weren't a playoff team when they got swept by the Rangers in a series that wasn't all that close. My thoughts coming to the season, they had a good off season, a kind of an interesting one because they got Dubois. I think they're better in the net with Logan Thompson, a trio of Thompson, and you've got Charlie Lindgren and you've got Hunter Shepard from the pipeline. But I mean, what do we make? What do we really make this team? I'm not so intrigued by them. I guess I'll start with you, Colin. What do you make of this team heading into the season?
Well, I like aggressive moves. That's why I don't want to crush the Penguins for what they're doing with Malkin and Crosby as they're getting older. I say always compete. I don't hone in on the rebuilds as much as other people do. And I think with the Caps, this is kind of an example of why I like to see teams go out and be aggressive, get Mangiapane, see if he can recreate that season he had. Well, I don't know if it was 2 or 3 years ago he had that big breakout, but take a risk on Pierre-Luc Dubois. I don't necessarily think it's going to work with him, but I like this mentality that they have to maximize the rest of Ovechkin's career and go for it. So at this point, I would call them a playoff team, especially if Lindgren can be a full-time goaltender and replicate the flashes we saw last year.
Yeah, I mean, it felt like in a slow race last year, they were the ones that just they didn't have the glaring weaknesses exploit them. They weren't the one that fell out. Alex, do you still see them as a playoff team? Because I mean, my thing is that you have Ovechkin, he's starting to glide. And that offense, 2.6 goals per game last year, I think, not very good. And was just, I don't see a path for that offense getting better. So if you just have unless your defense shows up and goaltending shows up every night, which, I mean, you have teams that do that and get themselves into the playoffs. I don't see a path to the playoffs for this team. What do you think heading in? Do you see it, or are you not as high on them?
I like what they did this offseason, especially defensively. Jacob Chikrin, that's a solid addition to the top four, as is Matt Roy. And then, Logan Thompson should be a pretty big upgrade over Darcy Kemper. So I like those two additions. The biggest question for me is is offensively. I agree. I don't think the Pierre-Luc Dubois trade is going to work out for them, but you never know. I like what they have up front with Dylan Strome. They have some good young players in Connor McMichael and Hendrix Lapierre that kind of need to take a step forward for them, especially with TJ Oshie playing this season on LTIR. So they need contributions from their young guys. I could see them getting into the playoffs. I think they're going to be in the mix with the Islanders and maybe less so the Penguins to make it. I think they're improved this offseason by quite a bit. And even though Ovechkin's not what he was in his peak, he's probably still a 30-goal scorer. So you can count on him. I think it's going to probably come down to the Islanders and the Capitals for me for that fourth spot in the division. But I could definitely see the Capitals making it again. I don't think they're going to take a step back. I think they did a good job trying to stay competitive this offseason.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you guys both think that they're staying competitive and they're making the moves. I guess, I mean, with Pierre-Luc Dubois, that's the interesting part, is that he's on his third team in 3 seasons and his fourth team in his career. And really, this is the team that he's got to figure it out with. I guess I'll stay with you, Alex. Why could Pierre-Luc Dubois in Washington work out with? I mean, you got Ovechkin on the wing, so that's a scorer that you can possibly work with, but if they play together, obviously. But why is this match that could work and that can help their offense really?
I mean, it just comes down to this kind of like being the last chance for Dubois. This is his 4th team, I think, right?
Yeah.
And he's only 25, 26 years old. Even though he still has that massive contract, the Caps could buy him out at the end of the day if he stinks. So he can't be as bad as he was last season with Los Angeles. It's just not going to fly. So it's kind of, this is it for him. Like, he has to show that he can be a 60-point scorer again, like he was in Winnipeg and started his career with Columbus. So I don't know if it'll work. I think, having Ovechkin in his prime, it definitely could have helped him bounce back, but Ovechkin's not the player that he used to be. So, and they don't have a ton of skill around him. Like, he's not going to be playing on a line with Dylan Strome, I don't think, because Dylan Strome is a center. So I don't know, does Dubois play with Mangiapane and maybe Connor McMichael or something like that? We'll have to see. But there's definitely no guarantee it works out. It could totally backfire on them for sure.
Yeah, it does feel like for Dubois, it's get it right now, get it right, because this is your third team. It's his third team in 3 seasons, and he still has 7 years on that contract. So I think he signed an 8-year deal, and he's got 7 years left on it. I kind of wanted to bunch the Capitals and the Penguins together as the 2 teams that feel older. And I don't know if they are statistically the oldest teams in the NHL, but they do feel that way. And this leads to a team on the other end, which I think is one of the teams that's perceived as a younger one, the Flyers, where for me, I'm kind of intrigued by the Flyers because you have a lot of young pieces there, a lot of young players there. And you have the X factor, the wild card, Matvei Michkov, which leading up to that draft, there were a lot of people thought he was going to be a top 5 pick, and he fell to the Flyers, one of the elite talents. And if he really is elite, this Flyers team could take a big jump. I like their defense is young. It's a young defense that's intriguing. So I'll start with you, Colin. Where do you see this team stacking up? Because obviously it fell apart at the end of last season, missed the playoffs because of it. And goaltending question mark. They're not necessarily good up the middle. But where do you see this team stacking up? Because there are a lot of intriguing pieces here.
I think you already said it. I think goaltending is a real issue here. Sam Ersson is going to start the season as their number 1. Danny Briere pretty much came out and said that the other day. But he kind of faltered down the stretch when he did take on that number 1 workload once Carter Hart went on the leave of absence. Mm-hmm. And I think in the first half of the season, the Flyers built up a little bit of a playoff cushion with Carter Hart and Sam Ersson as a good tandem, and certain other things clicking for them. Their defense was better last year. They lost Sean Walker. There's a couple moving parts there. So it's a lot of the same guys returning and just not a lot of the advantages that I think helped them secure that playoff position for the majority of last season. And with Michkov, I think the optimism should be more of a long-term thing, because the Flyers themselves have said on the record like countless times by now that they expect a ton of growing pains, especially since this guy has a bad defensive reputation. He did in the KHL and he did before he got drafted. And you're coming in with John Tortorella, and they're almost doing it intentionally. Like, we know this guy's going to whip you into shape, and we know it's going to be bad at first, but we think in a long-term rebuild, that's the way we actually want to do it, is for you guys to butt heads.
Yeah, I mean, John Tortorella, if there's any coach that's going to preach defense and have no problem benching you, it's him. Mm-hmm. And he's going to leave you a healthy scratch, or he's going to leave you out of the lineup.
Wait to see the headlines this year.
Yeah. Philly's gonna eat this up with if he's missing shifts or playing poorly defensively. It's gonna be. I mean, it's interesting because with that in mind, is it the best idea to? I'll leave this with you, Colin. Is it the best idea to bring him into the NHL right away, or have him in the AHL at the beginning of the season, maybe, or even just for half the season? Say like, all right, you can work on your defense here before bringing them up, because there's an interesting catch where I believe in letting prospects develop at the NHL level. If they're elite, like Connor Bedard is, or in Michkov's case, Michkov is one of those players, you want to give them that ice time at the NHL level and let them learn there. There is, though, the idea, I mean, Kirby Doc's the example of a player coming in, getting thrown into the fire, not being ready, and then they feel like damaged goods after that. So do you think that it's better to have him start at the NHL level, have this year be a growing pains year at the NHL level, or would you rather him do you think it makes more sense for him to be in the AHL and develop there first?
I think just in this particular circumstance, the negotiations with the KHL and the buyout, that whole thing, that would have never happened if he was coming over to play in the minors. It was really about a jump to the NHL. So, I mean, in this individual circumstance, I don't even really think it's an option. Mm-hmm. There's definitely something to be said for going through those times, working your way into things. But with a prospect rated this high, and I guess I don't know if people look at him the same way because he was a 7th overall draft pick, but it was a bit of a unique circumstance. With a prospect this high, I think he is on that level where I think they're very much set on him being an NHL player right away.
Yeah, I guess the only question is if he is struggling defensively, if Tortorella just healthy scratches him or leaves him off the ice for limits his ice time. I guess shifting to you, Alex, what do you think of the Flyers heading into this season? Because I mean, I'm a little intrigued. I think they're going to be one of these teams they might not make the playoffs, but they're going to play a lot of 3-2 games, a lot of 2-1 games where you could say, oh, they would have won that one, or they could have won that one. They're just going to be that tough team to play against, where good teams might come in to Philly thinking, oh, this is part of our road trip. This is the team to take lightly, because the New York road trip is you play the Devils, the Islanders, the Rangers, and then you go to Philly, or sometimes the other way around. Oh, that's the team to take lightly, and then the Philly takes advantage of that, and they're not the type of team you can take lightly. Where do you see them heading into the season?
I would think they're going to take a bit of a step back this coming season, and I agree with Colin that I think the goaltending is a big concern for the Flyers between Ersson and Fedotov. We'll have to see what that looks like, or I guess maybe Cal Peterson figures in, but I doubt it. I think they also, you look at their center depth, and like Sean Couturier is not what he used to be, and he's still the first line center, and it seems like he fell out of favor with John Tortorella toward the end of last season as well. I think Michkov is still probably going to be pretty good, even if he has some bumps in the roads. He's just too talented of a player to not have at least some kind of impact. And I think you kind of look at the way the Flyers approached the offseason too. I think they maybe thought, okay, last season we overachieved a little bit. We're not going to kind of step back from our plan here and go crazy this offseason, because aside from Michkov, they didn't really make any external additions. I think like their lone move was re-signing Eric Johnson for the most part. Maybe they made some depth additions for the AHL too. I'm not too aware. Colin would obviously know better than me, but I could see them taking a step back. And it would probably mostly because of their goaltending. Like, I'm not sure how Ersson is going to fare, and Fedotov is kind of an unknown, even though he was pretty good in the KHL for the most part. So it wouldn't surprise me if they take a step back and they fall behind maybe the Capitals and the Islanders, maybe the Penguins, but I don't know. All these teams for me, they're all kind of like, you look at the middle part of the Metropolitan Division, and I think these teams are just all kind of like mid, to put it that way. Like I don't know. It's not like it was a few years ago, and the division looks so much stronger than it is now, or than it did then.
I guess that's a good thing about. I'll just leave this with Colin. Is it's a good thing with Briere is that credit him. A lot of people won't like this, but for a GM to know where the team is at and to know we're not going to go crazy, we're not going to, but we're still part of this process of we are trying to let the prospects and the young talent make its way onto the roster and make its impact. And it might not be exciting for a fan base that wants to see them back in the playoffs, but at least you know where you are, and that goes a long way, I think.
Yeah, and one thing to consider there is the Flyers are just in a really bad cap situation, really, for this year and next. They're paying a lot of guys who are not going to play NHL games this year, paying a lot of money to Kevin Hayes, Tony DeAngelo, Cam Atkinson just got bought out. Ryan Ellis is never going to play in the NHL. So they're loaded with these contracts, and you're going to get a combined 0 games out of. I just named 4 players. I know Oscar Lindblom has a dead hit. So that's 5 guys who are not going to play NHL games. And then they have a couple of other bad contracts on guys that are probably not performing up to their numbers. So the salary cap really has to figure into the conversation here.
Yeah, it feels like it's almost a take your medicine type of situation. I guess let's shift to you could say they're the final team in this tier. I mean, we'll talk about the Devils soon, but to the Islanders, and they're the other team I think that based on the conversation so far, they're fighting out the Capitals for that the 4th spot in the Metro, which could be a wild card spot, could not be. I think overall, you look at this team, and yes, it's a lot of the familiar faces, a lot of similarities, and at least you have a high. I see them as a high floor team, no low ceiling, high floor, where you could talk yourself into them being the 3rd best team in the division somehow if everything goes right. I mean, last season they were the 3rd best team even when not everything went right, but the reality is they've got good goaltending, they've got a good top heavy part of the roster, not a lot of depth, but they're one of those teams that's interesting because I think they're in that they are the peak middle tier team, it feels like. So Alex, let's start with you. Where do you see do you see a lot of people see the Islanders as the type of team that yes, they're going to take a step back because it's a similar roster, same as the ones in previous years, except for the Duclair edition, and or do you see it like, okay, maybe Patrick Waugh has a trick up his sleeve, but where do you see them heading into the season?
The Islanders kind of seem like the same team that they've been the last couple of seasons, just kind of hanging around the playoff race. I think it was 92 points 2 seasons ago and 94 points last season. And I think they're pretty much the same team. Duclair is a nice addition for them. I like that signing at the time. And if he can stay healthy, he could probably give them 20, 25 goals, even maybe pushing 30. He's come close a couple of times in his career, and we'll see what Maxim Siplikov can offer. He looked pretty good against the Devils in that preseason game the other night. I don't know if he could be a top 6 scorer for them, but he looks like he might be able to help a little bit. But still, I don't think the Islanders' depth is what it used to be. Anders Lee's game has been falling off a little bit. So has John Gabriel Pajot. There's no Matt Martin or Cal. Well, Matt Martin is there on a PTO, I believe, but there's no Cal Clutterbuck anymore. Yeah. On defense, I think that's probably the strength of their roster. If you look at Noah Dobson, he had a breakout season last year. And he can provide a lot of offense from the back end, which is something I think they need there because most of their defensemen are defensive defensemen. And then, of course, you have Sorokin and Varlamov, who are arguably the best tandem in the NHL. Sorokin did struggle a little bit last season, and maybe he was dealing with the back injury back then. That's why he struggled a little bit and had surgery this offseason. If he's up to par, then he's definitely going to keep the Islanders in the race. But to me, it just doesn't look like they've changed that much. I think they're kind of the same team that they were. They'll probably be fine, but I don't really see them being like a legit threat for the Stanley Cup for sure.
Yeah. I guess Colin, the same question. Do you see them as a high floor, low ceiling type of team, or I guess if you can make the case for them falling apart, what would that case be? Or are they just, this is what they are and don't expect any changes?
I guess falling apart, I probably couldn't make as good of a case. Patrick Waugh, I guess, is probably kind of an unconventional guy, which I like. I mean, I think to try to be shrewd, sure, why not? Think outside the box. Nobody in the NHL does that for some reason. And I'm also a really big fan of Noah Dobson. So I think if you have Sorokin, who, I still think he is one of the top goaltenders. I'll still give him that, even though maybe he didn't play at his peak last year. If you have guys, a number one defenseman moving the puck up ice who's going to control play, a legitimate number one goalie, you can rack up some points in this league. So I'm pretty optimistic about the Islanders.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird because you feel, even with the same group, you still feel that, like, yeah, they're gonna be in that mix and maybe a playoff team. I guess the real question for a lot of fans is, are you okay with being this type of team every season where you get into the playoffs, that's your ceiling, but then you get smoked by one of the elite teams in the division or Eastern Conference, and that's where they are. I guess let's move to this team that you can make the argument they're in that second tier because of a few question marks, but they're in the top tier. So this kind of segues us into the top tier. And this is the Devils, where last season everything went wrong for them. And goaltending was a mess, and they've overhauled the position. They now have Jake Allen and Jacob Markstrom, two new goaltenders, as their duo. Their defense was injured, and it was a mess. I mean, not a mess. Pretty much. It was Luke Hughes was starting primary, was their number one guy, and he was a rookie. He was a rookie, and you didn't have Dougie Hamilton. So there's kind of, what's interesting about the Devils is that the way they can miss the playoffs, I think, is the same recipe, the same formula as last season, and you kind of could see it with Luke Hughes already out. But I mean, I'll start Alex with this question more in depth, because not what you make of the Devils, because they look like a team that should be a cup contender based on the stars that they have on their roster. What is the path for them not being that type of team? What is the path for them unraveling? Is it really when you lose one star player or one key player like a Dougie Hamilton, like a Luke Hughes, that things unravel after that? Or what is it that would keep this team from being in that conversation? Because they were 2 years ago in that conversation. So what would prevent them from being there?
Yeah, I think it'd be pretty similar to what happened last season. You had Jack Hughes, who missed 20 games, and then even when he did play after the All-Star break, he was playing on one shoulder. You could tell he was never the same player. Timo Meier was not healthy for about 2/3 of the season. Dougie Hamilton played in just 20 games. So when you lose those three guys for so much time, and when they are playing, they're not even healthy half the time, that's definitely a significant factor. So if they have injuries like that again this season, it could get rough. I don't think they're going to have the goaltending problems that they did a season ago. I mean, unless Jacob Markstrom and Jake Allen get hurt, but that'd be really some cursed stuff right there if both of them get hurt. Markstrom has a track record of being healthy, so knock on wood that it stays that way. And, they shouldn't overwork Markstrom because they have a competent backup in Jake Allen. So I think their goaltending raises their floor a little bit this season and can probably keep them in games if they have injuries. Whereas last season, Vitek Vanacek and whatever other combination of goaltenders they use, whether it's Akira Schmidt or Nico Dawes, they just weren't capable of keeping the team in games. And I think Sheldon Keefe is going to make a big difference systems-wise. Under Lindy Ruff, they were a pretty run and gun, kind of high risk team. And, I think Sheldon Keefe is still going to want to play fast paced offensive kind of hockey, but there'll be a little more structure to them. And they've even already talked about changing their neutral zone structure compared to last season. I'm not a systems guy, so I don't know what changes they've made exactly, but they've definitely made he's definitely made some tweaks to the system already. So yeah, I think the floor for them, if they miss the playoffs again, would be pretty similar to last season, but more so injuries, because I don't see their goaltending falling off to the point where it would cost them this year. I think if they miss the playoffs again, it's because they're just riddled with injuries, and that's obviously becomes more of a long-term concern now, because instead of it being like a one-year fluke kind of thing, it's all right. Well, I think this team might be a little bit injury prone, so what do we do here?
Yeah, and I mean, I guess the question also on that is, if that happens, then you start looking at the front office where maybe they need to make changes up at the top. Colin, I'll shift to you a bit for this. I'll shift to you for this. Is what do you see? I mean, first off, do you see can you see the bottom falling out again? Is this team too good? And the second question I'll ask, is what separates this team from being a good team in the Metro and a cup contender possibly?
Well, something Alex mentioned that I think this all the time when we do season projections and stuff. It's so hard to project injuries because injuries were such a big part of the team last year. But do you say, oh, just chalk it up to luck and these guys will return? Do you say the injury that this guy had is going to carry over? Do you say this guy's injury prone? Whatever. It's just really hard to get a judgment on. And what if Jacob Markstrom does go down? I think that's a great addition for them. It's exactly what they've needed the last couple of years with this kind of revolving door that they've had. They have a high level guy who's more skilled than the rotation you just talked about, Akira Schmidt, and back when they had Vitek Vanacek. It's like he's just much better than the group that they've had in recent seasons. So you make that upgrade, you get Dougie Hamilton back in the lineup. Hopefully the forwards are in better health, but in some cases, I guess it is just that simple. Where if these guys are in the lineup, you're a different team.
Yeah, I mean, it's also worth noting that they added Brendan Dillon to the defense, though. Jonathan Kovacevic, Brendan Dillon, and I believe Brendan Smith also. So it's really like they went all in on fixing units that were issues for them last season. I guess, Alex, I'll go back to you on this real quickly. Like the same question: what would prevent them from being a cup contender type of team?
That's a good question. I think it would be Markstrom underperforming and not, to the level he was last season when he was like top 10 in goal save above expected and the 99th percentile in high danger city percentage. But at the same time, I don't think he'll need to be an elite goalie for this team to be a cup contender. If they stay healthy, they have the high end skill with Jesper Bratt, Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier, Timo Meyer, even on the back end, Luke Hughes and Dougie Hamilton. Those are two guys who are going to produce some offense from the back end, and maybe to a lesser extent, even Simone Nemitz. I think what would prevent them from being cup contenders probably injuries again. I think that was the biggest thing that prevented them from being a playoff team last season. And with the additions that they made this offseason between Brendan Dillon, Brett Pesce, Kovacevic, you had Stefan Nason and Tomas Tatar too. Their depth looks pretty good, so I don't really think their depth will be too much of a problem. It's really if their star players are injured again, then it's going to be a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I also do wonder because watching the Panthers last year and watching the Oilers, how they pivoted in the playoffs last year or during the Cup run, both teams, is how you need your forwards to forecheck, you need them to defend, and I guess that's a question not with Hischier or Arakawa, but with Jack Hughes, the smaller guy could get pushed around maybe. But I mean, that's a different question. We're kind of running low on time, so I mean we're in the top tier. So what I'll do is we'll split this. We have the Hurricanes and the Rangers. So what I'll do is I'll ask Alex first about the Rangers, which is for the Rangers, what could cause this team to not be a cup contender? And the second part is we are hearing a lot about is this the last cup run for them because they have some aging vets on this team. Do you think that the window closes? Because I don't agree with that. Where when you have Adam Fox and you have Igor Shesterkin, Shesterkin's going to get paid, so he's going to be part of that new core. If that makes sense, you're going to have a window that's open. But the two questions are: what can prevent them from being a cup team because they were the best team, President's Trophy winner last season, and what could prevent them? And part two is what is this the last chance? Really, is this the last chance for them to really win a cup with this group?
Maybe with this group, because I sure seems like Jacob Trouba is not going to be back with the team next season, but I still think they'll be cup contenders. So just probably have a little bit of different look to the roster. I mean, when you still have Artemi Panarin, Shesterkin, and Adam Fox, you're still probably going to be fine. Lafreniere is look like he's coming along too in his development. So I think they'll still be cup contenders, but what I think will prevent them from being cup contenders, and this has really just kind of been the story with them for the last couple of seasons, is they're not a very good 5-on-5 team. And as we see in the playoffs, teams that usually are not very good at 5-on-5 in the regular season don't make it to the Stanley Cup. The Rangers have gotten close a couple times, but they lost to Tampa a few years ago in the Eastern Conference Final in similar fashion. I think it was 2 games up. They were up 2 games on Tampa and Florida, and they lost both times. And that's because both Tampa and Florida were just much better 5-on-5 teams than them, and they got to them at the end. And Shesterkin can only do so much for them. You still need to be able to tilt the ice in your favor at 5-on-5. You can't just rely on Shesterkin and your power play to carry you, because usually teams are built that way. It comes back to bite them in the playoffs. The Rangers just happen to get a little further along in the playoffs because their goaltending and their power play are so elite. So that's what would prevent them from being Stanley Cup contenders. If we don't see some improvement from their 5-on-5 numbers from last season, that probably limits their ceiling as far as being a cup contender. I think if you look at the way the roster is currently constructed, I feel like they've gotten the most they can get out of this roster. They'll still be like a really good team, obviously, and you could put them in position to get in the Final Four in the NHL, but I'm not sure they can get much further than that.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what they do at the trade deadline with all this in mind, because I think they do better when they don't make the splash move. When when a few years ago they got Patrick Kane, they got Vladimir Tarasenko, and it was like, we're going all in on the cup, and then they lost in the first round to the Devils.
Yeah.
And when they make the minor moves, the Andrew Kopp moves or the Jack Roslovic moves, that's what I think is better. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do at the trade deadline. Colin, sorry, I won't get to the Rangers with you, but the Carolina Hurricanes are the other team in that tier. And the interesting thing for them, I'll ask you this, is that do you think they lost too much star power? Because they lost, I mean, Gensel was their trade deadline addition, so they don't have him on the roster. They don't have Brady Shea. Brendan Smith's not there. Do you think they lost too much star power, or is this team only going to get better? There's 2 ways to look at them, I think, because you have those young players like Seth Jarvis. He's a rising star in the NHL. You have Sebastian Aho's, entering his prime right now. First off, what direction do you see the Hurricanes moving in? And second is what would prevent them from being a cup team? Because they're always that team that's in the conversation, but then when the playoffs come around, they stumble in the second round. Or a few years ago, they were swept in the Eastern Conference Final. So what do you make of them, basically?
I bought into them as a popular cup pick over the last couple of seasons. And I think this offseason I was almost ready to throw in the towel a little bit, looking at the Marty Nish's contract situation and just certain things going on there. But now it's like they figured that one out. Brady Shea, he's a guy I liked a lot. So they got to remake the defense. But I do think Sean Walker's a good addition. Gostisbehere is what he is. I don't think anybody's going to argue it at this point. But I think the way Rod Brindamore is, he knows a player like that. Stick him on the third pair. Maybe he gives you a little on the power play. I still like the Hurricanes as a cup contender. And if you've seen a lot of teams that have won Stanley Cups in the past few years, thinking about Tampa, Colorado, they had been criticized for the same types of playoff exits. You're a great team in the regular season, and then maybe you lose 2-3 years in a row in disappointing fashion, but sometimes you have to take that step and eventually work your way up to the cup. So I think Carolina is still in good shape to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the cliche in hockey is you have to learn how to lose before you learn how to win, which in the playoffs you need to go through those. You need to go through those years of playoff defeats. I mean, the classic example is Wayne Gretzky walking past the Islanders locker room after the Islanders won their 4th in a row. You saw them all iced up, and just seeing that that's how hard it is to to win. That's what you need to take to win the cup. And it seems like the Hurricanes are they're always going to be in the conversation. It's just a matter of when they could finally, when it all clicks for them and they're finally, competing for the cup and in the final and possibly winning it. All right. We spent this is a long preview. So thank you guys for both toughing it out for a while. And thank you everyone for tuning in. That's all we got. And tune in next time for another great episode. Thank you.